There's a moment, right before you make a bold move, where your mind will scream all the reasons why you shouldn't. What if I fail? What if I get hurt? What if it doesn't work out? And in that moment, most people pause. And they let that pause turn into a permanent stop. But here's what no one tells you: that hesitation, it's not fear keeping you safe, it's fear keeping you small. You don't need more time, you don't need more certainty. What you need is 1 second of courage, 1 second to send the message, 1 second to say what you actually feel, 1 second to raise your standards, because 1 second of action, done over and over, builds a life that looks like you actually showed up for it. So, don't wait for confidence, just move and let confidence catch up to you. Let me know if you'd like a version for video voiceover, captions, or longer form. Fear disguises itself as protection, but actually holds you back. The hesitation we feel before taking bold action often comes from fear pretending to keep us safe, when in reality, it limits our growth. Overthinking is the enemy of progress. Pausing too long to consider what-ifs leads to inaction. That moment of doubt can become permanent if not challenged. You don't need more time. You need a decision. Waiting for the perfect moment is a trap. Progress starts not with preparation, but with the courage to act now. 1 second of courage can change everything. Big life changes don't require constant bravery, just repeated moments of boldness. 1 second at a time is enough. Consistent small actions create a powerful life. It's not about giant leaps. A life of meaning is built from repeated, intentional moments where you chose to show up. Confidence is the result of action, not the requirement. You don't become confident and then act, you act, and that's what builds confidence over time. Fear has a clever way of showing up. It rarely introduces itself with a loud warning or flashing lights. Instead, it wraps itself in logic. It says things like, maybe wait until you're more ready, or what if this isn't the right time? It whispers, you don't want to mess this up, do you? And because it sounds so reasonable, we listen. But what's actually happening is that fear is disguising itself as protection, when what it's really doing is holding us back from the life we're meant to live. It's not putting a wall between you and danger, it's putting a wall between you and growth. And the longer you let that fear run the show, the more your world shrinks. You don't take the chance, you don't have the conversation, you don't apply for the opportunity. You don't express your feelings. You don't go after what you want, not because it's impossible, but because fear made you think it was unsafe to try. What's dangerous is that we often mistake fear for wisdom. It feels smart to hold back, to be cautious, to analyze every outcome before making a move. And yes, in some cases, careful thought is valuable. But most of the time, when you feel stuck, it's not wisdom keeping you where you are. It's fear pretending to be your friend. Fear knows your patterns. It knows exactly where to strike. It hits you in the places you've failed before. It reminds you of the moments you were rejected, ignored, or hurt. And it does it not because it wants to protect your heart, but because it wants to protect your comfort zone. That's what fear is most loyal to, your current version of life, not your potential. It wants you to stay familiar, not fulfilled. The trouble is, the more we give fear power, the more we train our brain to listen to it as truth. We start calling our hesitation intuition. We tell ourselves it's not the right time, when deep down we know there may never be a perfect time. We dress up our fear in the clothing of patience, strategy, even emotional maturity. But underneath all of that is a scared voice that just doesn't want to be vulnerable again. Vulnerability means exposure. It means there's a chance we might fail, or fall short, or not be enough. And that possibility is so uncomfortable that we let fear convince us to avoid the experience altogether. But growth lives in discomfort. Everything you want, confidence, love, purpose, success, joy, it all sits on the other side of a moment where you do something that feels risky. And when fear is in control, it doesn't care about your goals. It only cares about safety, not real safety, the emotional safety of staying small, of not being seen, of not being judged. Fear will always trade your progress for a sense of control, and it does this silently. No alarms go off, no signs show up in the sky, just a quiet pulling back, a thought like, maybe not today. And suddenly another year goes by, we normalize this, we tell our friends stories about how we're working on ourselves, or just focusing on other things right now. But inside, we're avoiding. We're letting fear wear the mask of logic and call the shots. The scariest part isn't that fear stops us from doing big, brave things. It's that it stops us from doing small, meaningful ones every single day. Saying what you really mean, asking for what you need, showing up when it's easier to stay quiet, starting when you feel unprepared. These aren't massive, dramatic leaps. They're tiny moments where fear gets the first vote. And if you don't override it, those moments add up. Over time, you don't just miss opportunities. You miss becoming the version of you that those opportunities were building. Fear doesn't just rob you of experiences. It robs you of evolution. It stops you from knowing how strong, capable, resilient, and powerful you truly are. Not because you aren't those things, but because fear won't let you find out. It convinces you that staying the same is better than risking failure. That silence is better than rejection. That control is better than connection. And slowly, you live a life that looks safe on the outside, but feels small on the inside. All because fear dressed up like protection, and you believed it. There's a dangerous illusion that lives in the space between intention and action. It tells you that pausing to think something through is always wise, that taking more time somehow guarantees a better outcome. But too often, that pause becomes a trap. What starts as just a moment to consider turns into hours, then days, then weeks of mental gymnastics, looping through every possible scenario until the opportunity is gone. This is the silent killer of dreams, overthinking. It doesn't look like destruction. It looks like planning. It looks like being responsible. But in reality, it's fear dressed up in strategy, keeping you stuck by convincing you you're making progress when you're really standing still. Overthinking is the enemy of momentum. It takes your energy, your drive, your desire, and turns them into paralysis. The reason overthinking is so seductive is because it gives us the illusion of control. If I can just think through every possible outcome, I can avoid pain. If I can mentally rehearse every version of the conversation, I'll know exactly what to say. If I can just be sure, then I'll finally take the leap. But that's the problem. Certainty never comes. You can think something through for hours and still not know how it will turn out. You can prepare your heart for every rejection and still be caught off guard. Life doesn't give us the gift of guarantees. It gives us the choice to act anyway, and the longer you delay, the more you train your brain to believe that clarity comes before action, when in truth, action is what creates clarity. We think overthinking is harmless, but it slowly erodes your belief in yourself. The more you second, guess, the more you internalize the idea that you can't trust your instincts, that you need more research, more opinions, more validation before you do anything. And before long, you're outsourcing your decisions to everyone else's comfort level. You're paralyzed not because you don't know what to do, but because you're afraid of doing the wrong thing. That's what overthinking really is, fear in disguise. It's fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of regret. It's the mind's way of saying, if I don't move, I can't mess up. But not moving is its own kind of failure. It's just slower, quieter, less visible. But the regret it brings can be just as heavy. What we often miss is that action doesn't have to be big to break the pattern. It just has to be real, sending the message, asking the question, taking the first step. You don't need to know the full plan before you begin. You just need to do something, anything, that disrupts the cycle of mental looping, because the more you act, the more you train your brain to value progress over perfection. You begin to see that confidence doesn't come from knowing, it comes from doing. It's built in those tiny moments when you choose action over delay, when you say, I don't have all the answers, but I'm moving forward anyway. The most tragic part of overthinking is that it convinces you you're not ready when readiness was never the requirement. The truth is, most people don't lack ability, they lack decision. They're waiting for the fear to go away before they act, not realizing that fear doesn't leave until you move. You can't think your way into courage. You have to act your way into it. The only way to silence the doubt is to do the thing you're doubting yourself over, because once you do, your mind starts to recalibrate. It stops asking, "What if I fail?" and starts saying, "Look, I survived. I handled it. I'm okay." This is where transformation begins, not in the endless loops of mental rehearsal, but in the imperfect, real life action you take in the presence of fear. That's what breaks the cycle. That's what builds trust in yourself. Not the hours you spend planning, but the seconds you spend doing. The brave second you choose to stop analyzing and start moving. Because every time you interrupt the pattern of overthinking with action, you take back your power. You stop waiting for the perfect answer and start living your actual life. And in that space, where thought meets movement, that's where everything starts to change. We often convince ourselves that what we need is more time, time to prepare, time to think, time to wait for the right moment. But the truth is, more time rarely gives us more clarity. More time usually just gives fear more space to grow. Every second spent waiting becomes an opportunity for doubt to dig in deeper, for insecurities to multiply, for hesitation to settle in like a habit. What people really need is not more time. They need to decide. There's a world of difference between waiting because something genuinely needs to unfold and waiting because we're scared to move. Most of the time, we fall into the second category. We're not waiting for things to align, we're stalling because taking the first step feels too heavy. When you look at the people who create momentum in their lives, you'll notice they're not the ones who are the most prepared or the most qualified. They're the ones who decided they'd rather risk being imperfect than stay stuck. They decided their future was more important than their comfort. They decided that waiting wasn't protecting them, it was holding them back. That decision, even when made without all the answers, is powerful because when you decide, you break the loop. You say to yourself, "I don't need to feel 100% ready. I just need to be 1% more willing to try than I am afraid to fail." That shift in mindset opens the door. It gets you out of the mental waiting room and into the real world, where things actually begin to happen. The longer you wait, the more you start to believe the lie that you're not capable. That lie is reinforced every time you hesitate. Every time you let the moment pass, every time you say, "maybe tomorrow," but don't mean it, the belief that now isn't the time becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You start building a life where nothing feels urgent enough to act on, where you sit on your desires like they're decorations instead of directions, but inside there's still a voice that wants more. A voice that says, "What if I just started?" That voice gets quieter the longer you ignore it, but it never completely disappears. It waits, it watches, and it wonders what kind of life you'd be living if you had acted the first time you felt called to. Decisions are scary because they cut off other options. They say, "This is the road I'm choosing," which means every other road is left behind. That feels risky, especially in a world that glorifies keeping all your options open. But the truth is, indecision is its own decision. Not choosing is still a choice. It's just one that guarantees you stay exactly where you are. There is no path that doesn't require sacrifice. You either sacrifice the illusion of control and take the risk, or you sacrifice the life you could have had for the sake of comfort. But you can't have both. You can't grow and stay safe. You can't move and remain rooted in the same fear. The people who move their lives forward understand this. They don't wait for the fear to go away. They don't sit around hoping the perfect moment will arrive. They act, and because they act, they learn. Because they learn, they grow, and because they grow, they gain confidence. Not the fake kind that comes from empty affirmations, but the real kind that comes from evidence. The evidence that says, "I've handled hard things before, I'll handle this too." You don't get that kind of confidence by waiting. You get it by choosing. Choosing to speak up when you usually stay silent. Choosing to say yes when everything in you wants to say no just to avoid discomfort. Choosing to trust your gut even when you're not sure how it'll work out. That's where personal power comes from. Not from the moment everything feels right, but from the moment you decide to move anyway. Because once you decide, life starts to meet you where you are. Doors you never saw begin to open. People begin to respond differently. Your energy shifts, and suddenly what felt impossible starts to feel inevitable. And it all begins the moment you stop waiting and start deciding. 1 second, that's all it takes to change the direction of your day, your energy, or even your life. We often believe that courage is something grand, an enormous act of bravery or a life-altering risk. But the truth is, courage rarely shows up like that. Most of the time, it's quiet, it's subtle. It's a single second of saying yes instead of no, of leaning in instead of pulling back, of speaking up instead of staying silent. 1 second of courage is the gateway to all the progress you want to make. It doesn't need to last an hour. It doesn't need to be broadcasted to the world. It just needs to be real, and it needs to be yours. Think about how many moments pass where you could have made a move, the conversation you could have started, the text you could have sent, the boundary you could have set, the project you could have launched. But you didn't, not because you didn't care, but because fear got the first word. You waited for the perfect words, the right energy, the ideal time. That pause, that hesitation, it's where most dreams go to die. Not in huge failures, but in the moments that never happened. 1 second of courage, if acted on, could have changed everything. Not because the act itself is massive, but because of the momentum it creates. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to move with fear in the passenger seat. It's not about being fearless. It's about being unwilling to let fear decide for you. The problem is, most people think they need to feel brave before they act brave. But that's not how it works. You act first, then the feeling follows. That 1 second window, that exact moment when you feel the impulse to do something meaningful but terrifying, is sacred. What you do in that moment determines whether fear gets stronger or you do. If you ignore the impulse, you reinforce the belief that it's unsafe to try. If you act on it, you start proving to yourself that you're more capable than your doubt would like you to believe. 1 second of courage is not about being reckless. It's about alignment. It's about recognizing the difference between the fear that keeps you alive and the fear that keeps you small. It's about honoring your desire to grow more than your desire to stay comfortable. That second might look like introducing yourself to someone who inspires you. It might look like asking a question in a room full of experts. It might be telling someone how you really feel or finally asking for what you need. It might even be choosing to walk away from something that no longer serves you. Each of those things starts with a second of decision. A second of I'm doing this, even if my voice shakes, even if I mess it up, even if it doesn't go perfectly. The magic of that second is that it multiplies. The more you practice it, the easier it becomes. You start to trust yourself more. You start to believe in your own resilience. You realize that rejection isn't fatal, failure isn't final, and discomfort isn't a danger. That second becomes a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. Eventually, what once felt terrifying becomes normal. What felt out of reach becomes a part of who you are. You begin living in alignment with your values, not your fears. And when you do that consistently, your life starts to reflect your courage instead of your caution. People often ask, how do I become more confident? The answer is deceptively simple. You become confident by being courageous in small, consistent moments. You don't wait for the confidence. You earn it 1 second at a time. That message you send, that boundary you hold, that decision you make, each one proves something powerful, that you're not waiting to be perfect to participate in your own life. That you're willing to be seen, that you're willing to try, and that willingness builds a kind of self-respect that no one else can give you. 1 second of courage may not solve everything, but it starts everything. It tells your mind, your body, your spirit, I'm in charge now. It shifts your energy, it breaks the pattern, it changes the trajectory. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to honor the moment when your soul says go, and your fear says wait. Choose go. That second could change everything. We tend to believe that transformation comes from a few grand moments, huge victories, big decisions, major changes. But the truth is, lasting transformation is built on the back of small, consistent actions. It's not the monumental shift that creates the life you want. It's the choice you make on an average Tuesday to do the thing that stretches you. It's the decision to show up even when it would be easier not to. Consistency in small moments is what builds resilience, character, confidence, and momentum. A life that looks powerful on the outside is almost always built through private moments of discipline, commitment, and courage that no one else sees. It's in those unseen choices that your future is quietly being built. Most people wait for motivation to strike. They hope to feel energized, confident, or inspired before they take action. But hyper-formers, those who actually build lives they're proud of, reverse that process. They act first, even when they don't feel ready, and they allow the feeling to follow the action. That's the secret. The emotion you're waiting for doesn't come before the action. It comes from the action. When you get up early and go for the walk, when you speak kindly to yourself instead of judging, when you send the message you've been avoiding, when you stay calm instead of reacting emotionally, those are the tiny acts that start to change who you are. And when done consistently, they start to shift your self-image from someone who thinks about changing to someone who follows through. This is how true confidence is built, not through fake positivity or repeating affirmations in the mirror, but through real-world evidence. Every time you act in alignment with who you want to become, you gather proof that you're capable, and that proof is what builds unshakable confidence. You stop needing people to believe in you because you've shown yourself who you are through action. The gym session when you were tired, the difficult conversation you didn't avoid, the time you said no when it would have been easier to say yes, those are not minor. They are the bricks in the foundation of a life that reflects your values, not your excuses. People underestimate the compound effect of these small actions. They think, it's just one day I skipped, or it's just one message I didn't send. But what they don't realize is that patterns are made in these moments. Habits are formed not in dramatic decisions but in daily defaults. The default to wait, the default to avoid, the default to stay small. Every action is a vote for the type of person you're becoming. You're either voting for fear or for growth, and the more you vote, the more natural that path becomes. So if you want to build a life that feels strong, aligned, and purpose-driven, you don't need to take massive leaps. You need to make tiny, intentional moves again and again. This principle applies to every area of life. In relationships, it's not about grand romantic gestures. It's about consistently showing up with honesty, presence, and effort. In your career, it's not about waiting for the big break. It's about doing the work no one sees with excellence and integrity. In your personal growth, it's not about going on a retreat once a year. It's about how you manage your thoughts and behaviors in the smallest, most tempting moments. Transformation is rarely loud. It happens quietly in the everyday choices that shape your mindset, your habits, and your identity. And here's what makes this so powerful. Anyone can do it. You don't need to be the smartest, the fastest, or the most talented. You just need to be willing to show up consistently. You need to be more committed to your future than to your comfort. Most people fail not because they lack ability, but because they lack repetition. They try something once, maybe twice, and then they stop. The people who succeed aren't perfect. They're just persistent. They keep casting votes for the version of themselves they want to become, even when it's boring, even when no one is watching, even when they don't feel like it. That kind of discipline isn't easy, but it's empowering. Because once you realize that your life is built in the small moments, you stop waiting for big ones. You stop hoping for a breakthrough and start creating one. You take ownership of the seconds, the minutes, the hours, and you turn them into building blocks. You learn to trust the process, and that trust becomes a force stronger than doubt. It becomes your edge. Your superpower, your proof that you don't need to be extraordinary. You just need to be consistent. Confidence is often misunderstood. We think it's something we're either born with or something we magically acquire after enough success. But real, lasting confidence isn't something that appears before we act. It's something we earn through action. It's built, piece by piece, each time we do something we were afraid to do. It's built when we show up for ourselves, when we keep promises we've made to ourselves, when we stop outsourcing our sense of certainty to someone else's approval. Confidence doesn't come first, it never has. The action comes first, and it's precisely the willingness to act in the absence of confidence that ends up creating the version of you who is confident. What most people don't realize is that waiting for confidence before you move is actually a trap. It's fear pretending to be strategy. It says, let's get ready first, then we'll go. But it's an endless loop because the fear never actually disappears. No matter how much you prepare, your brain will still offer doubts. You'll still have the voice that says, what if you're not good enough? Or what if you fail? If you keep listening to that voice and waiting for it to go away before you act, you'll spend your whole life in the waiting room. The way out is to reverse the order. Move first, act first, speak first. Then watch what begins to grow inside you after you do. Think of any skill you've ever gained confidence in. Whether it's learning to drive, speaking in public, or just asserting yourself in a conversation. At some point, you had to do it badly before you could do it well. You didn't gain confidence by thinking about it. You gained it by doing it, usually with a lot of fear and awkwardness. That's what we forget as adults. We expect confidence to precede action. We expect to feel strong before we show up. But the people who grow, the ones who actually build a solid belief in themselves, are the ones who act even when they don't feel ready, because they know the readiness is a lie. The real transformation comes when you show yourself, through experience, that you can survive the things you're scared of. That's how you break the cycle. Every time you act without waiting to feel confident, you change the story your brain tells about what you're capable of. You gather evidence that says, I didn't know exactly what I was doing, but I figured it out. I was terrified, but I spoke anyway. I didn't feel ready, but I tried, and that evidence becomes your new reference point. It gives you something to lean on the next time fear shows up. It helps you build a version of confidence that doesn't rely on perfect conditions because it's rooted in experience, not theory. It's not shallow performance-based self-esteem, it's deep, earned internal belief. That belief becomes your power because once you trust yourself to act without needing permission from your fear, everything changes. You stop over-explaining. You stop asking for constant validation. You stop performing for applause and start moving from alignment. You know who you are not because someone told you, but because you proved it to yourself in the moments that mattered. That kind of confidence doesn't fade when things get tough. It doesn't waver with rejection or criticism. It stays steady because it's been tested. It's been earned. It's not dependent on how the world responds. It's built on how you showed up despite the world's response. And the most powerful part of all of this, it's available to anyone. You don't have to be loud or extroverted or flawless. You just have to act over and over in the small ways and the big ones. You have to walk into the room. You have to make the call. You have to raise your hand, speak your mind, follow through, not because you're already confident, but because you want to be, and the only path to becoming it is through doing the very thing you feel unqualified to do. That's how confidence becomes who you are. It's not given, it's not taught, it's built, not from talking about it, but from living it. You do the scary thing first, and the confidence follows behind, quietly, growing with each step. And the more you do it, the more you realize that you never needed to feel fearless. You only needed to be willing, willing to try, willing to show up. Willing to believe that even if it's messy, even if it's hard, even if you stumble, it's still better than waiting for the perfect version of yourself to finally arrive.